For joining us for our discussion of Grow Towards Your Greatness, 10 Steps to Living Your Best Life by Dr. Omekongo Dibinga. We've learned today that leadership is not about a position you hold, but how you interact with and influence those around you. This morning, we heard Dr. Dibinga talk about his acronym LEAD: listen, educate, advocate, and decide. These are all critical acts of a leader. But before we're ready to lead others, we must be confident in ourselves and learn how to grow towards our own greatness. This book explores another one of Dr. Dibinga's acronyms, GROW: give, release, overcome, and win. In this book, Dr. Dibinga provides 10 steps along with thoughtful prompts to guide you towards taking control of your own life. To lead today's discussion with Dr. Dibinga, I would like to introduce one of our very own Montco students. Sloan Harker is a business administration major who's preparing to graduate this spring. During her time at Montco, Sloan has served as the president of the Future Business Leaders of America, bringing home a national title. She also serves as a supplemental instructor for financial accounting and is a champion for the college within the greater community. Outside of academics, Sloan is a member of her local Lions Club and involved in the Lansdale Women in Business community. Please join me in welcoming Sloan and Dr. Dibinga to the stage.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you, Dr. Dibinga, for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk more about Grow Towards Your Greatness and get into how you discussed writing this book. So can you begin by just telling us a little bit about your journey in writing this book and what inspired you to get into it?
So this is my second book. My first book was poetry, From the Limbs of My Poetry, Poetree. I was trying to be creative, like limbs, tree. Anybody? Tough room. All right. So, I came into the whole speaking thing through hip hop and poetry. And I started realizing that I wanted to reach a different audience because I was doing a lot of work with young people in prisons and in schools and community centers and the like. But I wanted to create something more for adults who aren't necessarily into that. And so I started working with Les Brown, who's one of the world's greatest motivational speakers, and another man named Willie Jolly, and working with them and reading their motivational works and hearing their story, it decided to give me the inspiration to maybe also tell a story about my journey, but in a motivational way that could help adults primarily.
In the introduction of the book, you wrote on how many times the title had changed.
Yeah.
Did you see any change or evolution within the content of the book as you wrote it?
No, the content is always going to be the same. And even with the title, of Grow Towards Your Greatness, it was again, listening to Les Brown who said, you don't just go through experiences, you grow through them. And when he said that, that was something that really resonated with me. And so that's why it became really important for me to have that word grow in there. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm just a big fan of acronyms. And so what if I took that powerful phrase about growing through experiences and then actually took it to a deeper level and made it stand for something?
Speaking on those experiences, and as someone who talks about the importance of one's heritage and one's background, how did your background and your heritage inspire you to make these GROW principles and as you approached creating this book?
Well, I started studying other people. When I started studying like Oprahs of the world, I saw that every successful person used these principles in some way, shape, or form. So for me, in terms of my journey, it was like, growing up in Boston. I mean, if you grew up, in like the 80s, early 90s, in an inner city community, poor, and you're dealing with the crime and the gang violence, and then on top of that, I'm dealing with the cultural issues that I had where people just hated me, because of my name. They were, I remember 7th grade, I wore something like this type of jewelry to school. And, just one 7th grade kid just saw it and was like, take that bleep off. And that's like, I chose not to do it and just walked up to me and just started punching me in the face just because I was different. And I have, 6 older siblings, 2 younger brothers as well. And, we all got it. Rocks thrown at us. My oldest brother was shot in the eye with one of those metal BB guns. Like, just because we were different. And it wasn't by choice. But here's the thing I learned. Everybody was different, but there's levels of difference, right? People start creating a hierarchy, and, hurt people. So we were kind of at the bottom, of that hierarchy. And so I just always remember, despite what my parents were telling me about my culture and my background, my mother's from the Baluba Kingdom in Congo, descended from, kings and queens and the like. And I just would leave the house and it was just a whole different story. So when my father came back from Zambia after he was in a coma for a year after they tried to assassinate him, that was when I really started to switch. On my report card, we had 35 grades in my 7th grade year. 27 of them were Fs in my report card because we had gym, and I balled. I'm nice. I got skills. I'm still nice. I know I haven't seen the courts here yet, but I'm sure they're nice. I'll bring my sneakers next time. But and it was just because I just had despair. I didn't, I hated my culture. They're making me hate my culture. I hated my community. They said I was going to die before the age of 25 because of drugs. And then, once he came back, and I just decided that I wanted to do something different. And that's when I started to embrace my culture more. I started embracing my history more. And that's what led to this journey. That's why in the book, that chapter is run towards your story as opposed to away from it. When I look back at my life, the most depressing times in my life were the times where I ran away from who I was. And the times that were always the best was those when I always embraced who I was. And that's what led to this, because I want other people to embrace who they are as well.
Is that something that you would recommend for those that may have experienced certain hardships that were similar to yours, is embracing that to help grow themselves?
Absolutely. Look, growing up in the 80s, when I look back at my surroundings, I noticed something, that a lot of us who came from different cultures, like outside of the United States, we would always do things to blend in. And one of the things I remember vividly is like a lot of the African people, a lot of the Latino young people, and a lot of the Asian students, young people as well. We were all like changing our names to sound more American, right? And sometimes people didn't have a choice. For example, me, my name is Omekongo, and I'm walking around one day, and one guy decides, you know what, your name is O. And I was a 7th grader, he was a senior, so, big shot and everything. It just stuck. Nobody cared to learn my story. I would meet somebody named Jose, and they'd be like, just call me Joe, right? And it's like we were all doing these things to blend in before we realized we're supposed to stand out. And so I feel like that story is for anybody. And anybody in here, maybe your situation, your story is not with the name situation, but just growing up, we've all had stories where we were doing things to fit in with other people. And if you recollect on them, you'll probably realize those are probably the saddest times for you. And when you embrace your name, when you embrace your religion, when you embrace your gender, how you define yourself, your sexual orientation, like when you embrace those things, life is just different that way. And so once I started to experience that, I wanted other people to experience that as well.
You talk a lot in the book about having strong mentors and how important your mentors were in your journey. How important in the process of personal development would you say mentorship is within growing to your greatness?
I would say mentorship's among like the most important things. It's one of the most important things because mentors can help you not reinvent the wheel, right? They can guide you through things. And, my mentors, I started with my parents, first and foremost. My parents were, refugees at 2 or 3 different times in their lives. And they went on to come to the United States, get 9 academic degrees, 3 PhDs, 2 from Harvard, as well. Both my mom and my dad got doctorates from Harvard. And I asked my father one day, it's like, why did y'all need to get all those degrees? Like, couldn't you stop at like 4, 6 or something like that? And, he didn't even think twice about it. He said, because we didn't want our kids to think they were better than us. And I was like, and, kind of tongue-in-cheek when he said it, but, they just really, when I look back at it, they just really wanted to take advantage of every opportunity. So they were like my first mentors. And of course, having older siblings as well, they mentored me and guided me through so much. And then when I look out in the community, I've had mentors who are teachers, I've had mentors who are former gang members, mentors in the speaking world, mentors in the academic world. It's like, why not? Some of us may know an artist formerly known as Kanye West, and he had a song called, You Can't Tell Me Nothing. And that idea of you can't learn from others, you can't be coached by others. When you look at sports, for example, we all know that it's not always the guy with the most talent who makes it to the top. It's the person who has some talent but is coachable, right? Who can listen to the lessons that other people are willing to teach them. And so I think that anybody, there's an African proverb, that says, if you want to be, rushed, you can just go alone. But if you want to get it right, you go together, you go in a group. And I think that really matters. And unfortunately, we live in a society where too many people feel like they have to do it on their own. And they lose a lot of time that they could have had if they just spoke with somebody and got some mentors.
For those people that might be feeling like they're alone, how would you recommend individuals seek out these mentorships or seek out these strong community influences that might help them grow?
So, Missy Elliott? So Missy Elliott, very prominent rapper, does R&B as well, and she's an incredible artist. When she was younger, she is from Virginia, and she grew up in really, troubled household and all of that. She used to write letters to the Jacksons, the Jackson 5 for like help, like come and save me, like all of this other type of stuff. And then when Michael Jackson got like the Vanguard Award or something like that, she was the one to present it to him. And I bring that up is because sometimes people don't realize that the mentor doesn't have to be a physical person right next to you. Sometimes you can look at the example of others, even people who aren't even around anymore, no longer alive, and find ways to model your life after some of the things that they did. And so I feel like when you do that, people can find mentors anywhere. So if you're kind of like a loner and, you don't really, go out much and socialize, which, we hope changes, there are, there's TED Talks you can watch. There's musicians that you can listen to. There's documentaries you can watch about leaders that you admire, right? I mean, there's everybody, Dr. King, Mother Teresa, there's documentaries on everybody. So there are ways for you to find people that can inspire you if you don't consider yourself more the outgoing type. And we know, particularly with COVID, that really exacerbated the crisis of loneliness that so many of us have in this country. But there are other ways to get around that in the beginning. But eventually, you want to be able to get out there and find some people that you can, put hands on and really touch and talk to.
Expanding on that idea of mentorship, do you see it as more of a value to be able to take on that inspiration and take on the guidance from those around you, or to be able to give that to others and help to grow others?
It's both and, right? And there are a lot of people who don't want to be mentors. And there's a lot of people who have knowledge that they don't want to share. Like, I've made that joke about my father, but, my parents, they came here because they wanted their children to have a better future than themselves. But there are some people who have all of the knowledge, and they want people to struggle because they struggle. And I just think that that's backwards. I think it's wrong. I think it's disrespectful. So for somebody who has the ability to be a mentor, whether you're a parent, whether you're someone in the community, when you look at some of these places in like Baltimore where the crime rates have gone down, one of the reasons is because the mayor, Scott, there has engaged like former gang members who can be out there on the streets teaching the young kids, you don't want to do that. I've been in this spot, I served 9 years, but some guys are like, nah, hey, if I went through it, they got to go through it. And the whole point of humanity, we're supposed to pay it forward. We're supposed to advance. So if you have the opportunity to do that and you don't, you're part of the problem, right? Don't complain about stuff's going on if you haven't tried to coach somebody into being better. And so, and for those on the other end who are receiving it, you know, as Dr. Maya Angelou said, as soon as you learn, teach, right? And as soon as you receive, give. And so if somebody's willing to pour something into you, like I said in our earlier talk, you just got to listen. You know, just take it in. And I've learned so much just by deciding to listen and not realize that I don't have it all figured out. And I think that that's part of the problem. And if you come from a circumstance where you had to be, maybe you're like the oldest of your siblings and you had to be the caretaker, or you were out on the streets at a young age and you had to, you know, you get used to just being hardened by life and not taking advantage of the people who can help you, you got to do the work to get out of that as well, because missing out on, I can't think of where I would be, I can't imagine where I would be if I didn't take advantage of the mentors in my life.
For the idea of having diversity and hardship and community being what guides you to grow and grow into your greatness, would you say that that's lost if someone might not experience those similar hardships? And how would they go and explore that for others?
So, like, if people who haven't really experienced hardship, is it harder for them to have the kind of grow towards your greatness experience? I don't think so. You know, Dr. King said everybody can be great because everybody can serve. And if you haven't been somebody who has dealt with a lot of struggles in life, you appreciate it more when you encounter people who do have those struggles. So, for example, I've never been a child soldier, right? When I go and in a country like, say, you know, Congo, and I'm meeting child soldiers, just because I haven't experienced that, it doesn't mean that I can't connect with them, because what I have experienced, and I don't care who you are, you can have had no experiences, like no super bad experiences, but I think everybody has had some experience being othered, right? And just being, and feeling like they don't belong. Like, we can all be, you know, I know all of y'all do this work in education for the money. So I know, like, I'm sitting in front of like a bunch of like multimillionaires, y'all are lying and stuff, you know, but it's like, you know, you can have a group of 30 millionaires, someone in that group's gonna be other. Like, we live off of separating ourselves from other people. So even if you haven't had the super challenging, like, you know, maybe no parent, maybe you grew up an orphan, or maybe drug addiction, maybe you didn't have all of that, but all of us know what it's like to kind of feel like we have been made to feel like we don't belong. Take that, and sometimes you just gotta multiply that by like 20 or 30 to understand somebody who's in a gang, right? Or to understand somebody who is, you know, maybe, you know, selling themselves on the street. And once you do that, it helps you draw that connection, a connection that you can't have if you don't listen. If you don't listen. I've seen people who have done incredible work overseas, traveling, you know, doing work in other countries, doing work in the United States as well. And, you know, they've come from great backgrounds. They didn't have many challenges, but it's that connection piece that you can make. So, for example, I'll give you another example. I did my doctorate on Jay-Z, Beyonce's husband, you know. Okay, once I say Beyonce's husband, everybody's like, oh, that guy. So, and, you know, Jay-Z, I teach a class on him. Feel free to come through and check it out. And, you know, he talks about growing up in a single-parent household, in the projects, Marcy projects, all of the violence, all of the death and stuff. The main person outside of his mother that he credits for Sean Carter becoming Jay-Z is his 6th grade English teacher, the white woman, Renee Rosenblum Loudon, who I interviewed for my dissertation. And she didn't come from that experience that they had. She talked about, I said, what was his top 3 experience? She said, drugs, drugs, and drugs were his top 3 influences. She talked about coming out of class and seeing dead bodies and people having pagers in class and just all of those different things. But she believed in them. And she gave them writing assignments and writing experiences. And then she took them on a field trip. And before they went to their destination on the field trip, she brought them to her home. And Jay-Z talks about, when I went into her kitchen, she had this thing. And you pressed on the fridge. And you press a button on it. And ice came out. Like, he'd never seen an ice maker before. And he was like, it made him realize how poor he actually was, but it also motivated him. He's like, I want that. And she told him, you can do whatever you want in this world if you're just willing to work your butt off. So you see a woman like that, coming from a completely different background, was a mentor to all of these guys. And if you hear Jay-Z talk in his interviews today, still talks about her. So you don't need to have the street, like, don't go out and just like start selling drugs just so you can say you lived that life, or join a gang or become a gang leader just to say you lived that life. Like, you don't have to do that. It's like there are lots of ways you can have that experience, but you got to believe in people and just want to connect with them.
In the chapter titled Perfection is Procrastination, you talk about how important it is to go out and fail from your efforts in order to reach the goals.
Yeah.
Can you speak on those moments in your life where failure might have led to positive outcomes that you wouldn't have seen otherwise?
Absolutely. I mean, so I repeated the 7th grade year. I don't think if I didn't have that experience, I don't know if I would have done the things that I've done now. Because maybe I just would have taken everything for granted. If school, like I was always a smart kid. Like before I got to Boston Latin School for 7th grade, I was honor roll student, all of that. But between what's happening with my dad overseas and all the stuff in the community, I just checked out. And when I came back the 7th grade year, a little bit more motivated. Next year, I was a little bit more motivated. I went through that year, repeating that year, to graduating as president of the Student Council and a member of the National Honor Society. That failure drove me. Some people say that fail, I spelled F-A-I-L. I love my acronym, so I'm just saying. And as some people say, it stands for first attempt in learning. First attempt in learning. It's not spelled LAIL, last attempt in learning, right? It's the first attempt. And a lot of people fail after the first try. And I've never taken like an actual like sales course, but one of the things I've learned talking to people who have is that most people don't make the sale until after the 7th try, right? And so that experience, having to repeat my 2nd grade, that motivated me. So, for example, when I applied to college, and, Emory was one of my top choices, they sent me 2 rejection letters just to make sure they knew that they didn't want me. Yeah, folks can be mean. You know what I'm saying? Like, one was fine. Like, I got the message the first time. But, Georgetown was my first choice. I didn't get into Georgetown. I ended up going to Morehouse College for my first year. And then I transferred into Georgetown after my first year. Because that failure experience in the 7th grade, it taught me that, as Willie Jolly says, a setback is a set up for a comeback. And so that helped. And then so my undergraduate, I didn't get into my top school. Then when I applied for my master's program, my top school was the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. They put me on the waiting list. I was like, wow, okay. Then they eventually took me off the waiting list and accepted me. And then when I applied to my doctoral program, they were basically like, yeah, that's nice, but don't call us, we'll call you. So I was like, all right, I'm sitting there, I'm touring, I'm traveling, I'm doing shows and stuff. I'm like, I don't need y'all. And then like a couple of months later, they're finally like, yeah, we do want you to come. And I'm like, no, like I'm good. You know what I'm saying? Y'all played me. And then my wife was like, you better go. So I went. So, but because I've been dealing with these setbacks, and these are just in the academic spaces that I'm talking about. I'll give you another example. My first book, From the Limbs of My Poetry, I released 2 albums before I did that book. So I have my albums out, Signs of the Time, Young Black Man's Anthem, doing my thing, hitting the open mic circuits, traveling, doing stuff, going to different countries and everything. So I'm like, yo, I want to read at Barnes & Noble. Why not? They sell books of poetry there. So I go into Barnes & Noble, like, yo, who do I talk to? Who handles that? I'm that dude. Like, I need to read here. And they're like, that's really cool, but if you haven't noticed, we sell books, and you don't have one. So I could have just went back and like, dang, that's true. What I decided to do, I started my publishing company, quit my job, and 9 months later, I published a book, From the Lens of My Poetry, mainly because I wanted to read at Barnes & Noble's and other, but because that failure of other things, I don't deal well with people telling me no, right? You have to, as they say, make no your vitamin. Like every no you encounter takes you closer to a yes. But most people stop at the first no. And here's the thing that I learned that y'all should really like take to heart for yourself. Never accept no from somebody who doesn't have the power to say yes. Right? And so many times we let so many other people who have no control over what we're doing tell us you can't do something. And I quote Jay-Z way too much. That's what happens when you study a guy for like 7 years. He says, as for the critics, tell me I don't get it. Everybody can tell you how to do it. They never did it. So one of the things you got to be mindful of is who are the people you're letting advise you on things? Now, there are some people who made it and are haters, and they don't want you to reach their level, so you got to pay attention to that too. But don't let failure drive you. I tell my kids, it's like in life, there's no losing, there's only learning. And if you take that mindset, everything is a first attempt in learning. And then after you realize that, you get first attempts in learning, first attempts in listening, first attempts in leading, first attempts in loving. Like all of those different types of things, they're first attempts.
Have these setbacks changed any way of how you approach these projects that you're working on?
Yes, absolutely. You know, part of learning things is also learning what not to do. You know, people say you got to make a to-do list, but you also have to make a not to-do list, right? And one of the things that I've learned is that, you know, somebody said that we're all born as originals, but we all die as copies, trying to be like other people. And one of the things I learned was that you have to be you because everybody else is taken. And when you're first coming into the game, whatever it is, whatever game it is, teaching, performing, right, you know, athletics, you know, you imitate the people that you see. Imitation is the highest form of flattery. But at some point, you got to start doing the work to be original. And so for me, this whole thing about blending poetry and hip hop into my speeches, the guys I was coming up watching weren't doing that. And so some people try to shy me away from doing that. And just like with, I said, run towards your story, the more I ran away from that, the less complete I felt. And so I just realized that I have to be me, and that really guides me. And if I'm in an environment where I'm doing something that doesn't feel like me, I don't do it. I've had situations where I've never been somebody who suffered from migraines in my life, okay? So I can't, but I had this one experience where, this was right around the time I wrote my book, where I was at this job, and there was just all of this stuff going on, and I just started, this is my only thought of what migraines would feel like. I just started getting these debilitating headaches that just prevented me from getting out of bed. And I never had that in my entire life. And, you know, do me a favor. Did you read in the bio that I'm also a magician? Did you read that? You didn't see that in the bio? Well, I'm doing a magic trick. Point at yourselves and look around the room. You notice how the majority of people are pointing at their hearts, like you? And not your head? It's the magic. Anyway, see, because in life, we're supposed to follow our hearts and not our minds. Our mind is going to lead us to our fears. Our heart's going to lead us to our dreams and our goals. And what's the root of the word heart? Is hear, H-E-A-R. You got to hear what your heart is telling you. And my heart was telling me, like, I don't know if this statistic is true or not, but I know we all grew up hearing this, that the majority of people who have heart attacks have them when? Monday morning, before they go to work, because that conflict between the heart and the mind. The mind says you need this job, the heart says you need to follow your dreams, and I'm going to attack you if you don't do it, right? Like, that's the mindset. And so my wife, she was like, you have to quit this job. And we were not in a great financial place in that part. We were trying to get a first house and all that other type of stuff. But you know what that conflict feels like. Maybe it's not the debilitating headaches, but maybe you're getting the palpitations. Maybe it's panic attacks. Maybe it's you drive home and you don't even remember how you got home, right? You just kind of autopilot. Like you know there's something greater for you. And you're supposed to follow that. You have to hear that. And so for me, it's like if I've probably left some good opportunities, money-wise or whatever, but it just didn't feel right. Even with my music, I could have gone the misogyny route, the gangster rap route, probably been like a multimillionaire and all of that other type of stuff, make all of that type, but I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. I wouldn't be able to look at, my mom when she was here, or my wife, or my 2 daughters and my son, and say like, but some people can do that. And look, it's not me hating on them or whatever. Some people I'm making this type of music so I can make enough money to help my community. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it, but you got to do what allows you to sleep at night. And that's a lesson that I've learned because I've had those sleepless nights. And every time I had those sleepless nights, it's because I was doing something that was not who I am.
Speaking on that personal individuality, being original as opposed to being a copy, like you mentioned, how would you recommend someone go about discovering their best self or finding that individual that they are when they feel it might not come as naturally to them?
You have to find what you would do if you lived in a world where we didn't need money. And then you just do it so well that people pay you for it. That's what you do. There are people who are making millions of dollars working on Wall Street, and they're miserable. My wife, she got her, full disclosure. I did not go to Georgetown because she was there. Just putting it out there. I'm just saying. So, because we met in high school, thank you very much. So, we were junior prom dates and all that stuff. So, we've known each other for a while. So, she went and got 2 masters, public policy, public health, public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School. And, our background, we're in our backgrounds, I study international affairs. You come to D.C., you're supposed to do the international affairs route, AfriCare, Save the Children, World Bank, IMF. So we were down there going that route. And she was doing it. She worked for AfriCare for a few years. She loved it. Worked for Save the Children for a few years and loved it. And then just, we all know career changes and stuff. Just started to get that, it's not really working for me like I thought, and so on and so forth at this stage of my life. And then she was doing personal training on the side. And she hurt her knee and had to have, couldn't really do a lot of her physical training stuff. Somebody exposed her to something called hot yoga or Bikram yoga. She went and took her first class. She was hooked. And took a couple other classes and was hooked. And then she said, I have to become a teacher. Now, back in that time, you had to go to LA for 9 weeks to study. There's a whole bunch of other trainings types now, like weekend trainings, but you had to go there for 9 weeks. And I was like, I think that's great, but I think you should do it only with the idea of owning your own studio one day. And when she was doing that, people were like, you're going to own a yoga studio? You went to Harvard. You got your degree from the Kennedy School. What are you doing? Why are you starting a yoga studio? But her heart was telling her that she needed to do this. So she left that whole nonprofit world, international, quote-unquote, development world, and all of that, and started the studios. And we're 10 years in to that. If you ever come down to D.C., it's called Bikram Yoga Works, so, BikramYogaWorks.com, and it's just like she's in her happiest place ever. So my thing is, it's like there are people who are been lawyers for their entire life who decide I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go open a bakery. There are people who have run a bakery for their entire lives and decide they want to go be a lawyer, right? You have to be open to that. Like a lot of us grew up on the 40-40-40 plan, where it's like you work at the same job for 40 years and you retire and get 40% of your salary for the next 40 years of your life. But now we live in your generation, it's like it's predicted you're going to have 7, 8 jobs before your time's up. That type of mobility, a lot of us didn't grow up knowing that was possible. So I think it's really important that if you follow what's in here, if she stayed in that nonprofit world, I could see it. She started feeling like I wasn't my job, just sad. And once she left that space, it just changed. So you have to feel comfortable with what your heart is telling you to do. And the people who are out there saying, but you're this, but you're supposed to do that, but you're supposed to have that, it's not their life. They're not going to be buried with you or cremated with you or whatever it's all you. L-I-F-E, you got to live it fully every day. You got to live it fully in every way. And these critics, they're just not you. And so you have to take what everybody says with a grain of salt. Chew the meat, spit out the bones, or sorry, if you're a vegetarian, chew the tofu, spill out the olive oil. I don't know, but you have to do that because you were put on this earth to bring out the greatness in you, not somebody else. You can't do that for other people. You have to do it for yourself.
Speaking on how you mentioned doing what you love as if, you didn't have to get paid, you didn't have to work. Do you feel that that's something that is accessible for everyone to be able to have that mindset, especially going into the current economy and with what things are looking like for college graduates and things like that? Is there a way to adjust this mindset for those that might feel like they are stuck with these 3 or 4 jobs that they have?
The mindset is available to everybody, but society doesn't want everybody to have that mindset. Society wants you to feel mentally enslaved towards a degree, towards a job, towards this, towards that. Society doesn't want free thinkers. They don't want people. Look, some of the greatest companies that have come out of this country or out of the world, they came out of times of depression and recessions and all of these other types of things, right? So when people say like, well, the way that things are going now, it's been worse, right? But people still thrive. People still push through. And so I say that when we get into, these rough economic times and all this other type of stuff, that's the time to get more creative. That's the time to look at diversifying your skills. That's the time, I have my degrees are in international, School of Foreign Service, so regional studies. My master's degree is in international development and conflict resolution, and then my doctorate is in international education policy. I can teach in those fields. I could have stayed in that whole route. But even in my master's classes and my doctoral classes, I was rapping and doing spoken word in class as part of my papers. And you know what happened? I had people who told me, they're like, you know what, Omekongo, like, I'm jealous of you. And I'm like, what's that about? And, I remember one person, she said, before I came to this school, to this program, I was a painter, and I don't paint anymore. Why? I remember I was speaking in Florida, Stetson College, I believe, and I gave that quotation. I don't want to say the wrong person, but we know the quotation if you hear it. They said, the most 2 important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you realize why you were born. And this junior came up to me afterwards, and she was crying. And she was like, I don't know why I was born. And so we started talking, like, well, what do you like to do? I love to dance. When was the last time you danced? Freshman year. Why do we teach people that part of reaching that next level and becoming great is separating yourself from the things that you love? Why couldn't my grad student colleague incorporate her paintings into the classes we were taking on development? Right? Like, why couldn't the student who was a dancer, and she wasn't even dancing for physical fitness anymore, like just as a hobby, she wasn't even doing it. Because, you know better than anybody else, the first thing, college students do is y'all don't sleep, but y'all started doing that in high school. Got us all-nighters, all the coffee, all of these different things, staying up, all this, separating, I'm sure you have classmates, separate themselves from the things that they love because they feel they got to get this degree, get that job, get that internship. And then once you get it, you feel like empty. So you got to figure out ways to balance that out. So whatever you're doing, ask yourself when you go home, are you still incorporating the things that you love to do? Do you love to sing? Just because you're a finance professor, why does that mean you can't still sing? Right? So that's what I'm saying. Society doesn't want us focusing here. They want us focusing up here. And once they do that, they got you. They got you hooked. Because if they get you here, if you don't get that goal, you're going to feel you're a failure and respond accordingly.
Reflecting on our theme for the day, how would you connect acting with purpose and leading with unity to the 10 steps that you outlined in the book?
Well, when I talk about growing towards your greatness, part of growing towards your greatness is finding your purpose. You have to find everybody has their mission in life. Everybody has their assignment. And you may find it when you're 5. You may find it when you're 25. You may find it when you're 75. It doesn't matter. What matters is the journey. And life is all about the journey. So when we talk about, leading with unity and acting with purpose, another Jay-Z quotation. He says in one of his songs, I'm clear why I'm here. How about you? why are you here? Why are you on this earth? Why are you living in this time right now? Why were you put here? What are you supposed to do? If you don't know, that's fine. Like I said, if we didn't live in a world where we needed money, Beyonce would still be singing. LeBron would still be playing basketball. The people, whoever your favorite politician is, will still be out there, serving the people. Whoever your favorite, preacher is, would still be, that's what you're supposed to do. And so when I look at this, I've found my purpose. I've been here all day. I'm not tired. I'm not angry. I'm not like, oh my gosh, when am I going to leave here? Because this is my purpose, to be in a space like this and learn from my fellow human beings and maybe share something that they can learn from as well. But when I went to DC for my first, after grad school, working in the nonprofit space, I'm thinking, nonprofit organizations, it's all about like kumbaya, like we all love each other and save the world and all of that. What was the first thing I was told when I went to DC? They're like, you got to cut your hair. I'm like, where did that come from? Like, that wasn't on the job description. Like, that's not on the website. Like, why do I got to cut my hair? And somebody said to me, one thing you don't understand is that a lot of these nonprofit spaces, they're just like corporate spaces. They're just as regimented. They're just as, all of this stuff. So I'm like, well, something's happening because I'm not, but I'm not going to lie to y'all. Like, I was like, well, shoot, should I do that to kind of get in the door? And I was talking to my wife. I'm like, I don't know. Like, would you feel like I'd be a sellout if I did that? And she was like, yeah, I think you kind of would be selling out. And I think the other reason she said that is because she's the one who does my hair. So Kendra was like, yeah, you're cutting my hair. So I don't think that, but it's just like, I think that that's really important, that we have to incorporate this, because if you don't find your purpose, you're going to live somebody else's purpose, right? You're going to live the way somebody else wants you to live. You're going to fit into we all fit into a system. The question is, are you going to fit into your system or somebody else's system? And there's always somebody waiting to take advantage of you in their system, from anywhere from being in a prison to being in corporate spaces to being in, government spaces. And I think that's part of the problem. You got to free yourselves.
You've had multiple projects since Grow Towards Your Greatness came out, and we know Trigger Words coming out in the fall. Can you tell us a little bit more about your other works and what we might be expecting from you in the future?
Well, I will say that, coming to this event inspired me to actually release Grow Towards Your Greatness as an audiobook. So on Sunday, I submitted that. So in about 5 or 7 days or so, if you go online to wherever you get your audiobooks, I know this one is, if you type in like Grow Towards Your Greatness audio, you'll see that. So that was something that I was inspired to do recently, because I was coming here, and to be quite honest, I was very pleasantly surprised that you all chose this book. This is my second of 5 books, that you chose this book, because more places talk more about, like my other book, like Lies About Black People, that's kind of like a book on, focus on like anti-racism and things like that. My book, Trigger Words, looks at political language. So the fact that you would choose my motivational book, particularly in this time, I really appreciated that. I really do. Another book I wrote for high school students, which is motivational, is called The Upstander's Guide to an Outstanding Life. But I've been working on so many projects. Here's another announcement. Oh my gosh. Okay, you're really good, by the way. Like, I know everyone says you're awesome. It's true. The skills are incredible. This week, I'm also releasing an AI rapper version. Yes, the first song is actually dropping on the 26th, which is, I think, Thursday or something. So his name is OD, because I'm coming, OD the MC. And so I'm working with guys to kind of repurpose music I've already written in a new voice to new audiences, reach some of the younger people as well. So that's a project I've been excited about, because I've always been kind of intimidated by the tech world and tech spaces. I'm not the biggest fan of AI, and I feel like a lot of people in the art space do a lot of, I teach a class called Cultural Appropriation or Appreciation. Some people call it the Kim Kardashian class, but I won't, or the Ariana Grande class. But I just, I'm very sensitive to how people are using AI to like culturally appropriate and things like that. So I've kind of shied away from it. But if my intentions are in the right place, it's my work, it's my writings. Nobody writes my stuff. So when you see this guy, that's all my lyrics. It's usually stuff I've already produced in my own voice, but now I'm just repurposing it into something else. So I'm releasing that this Thursday. But yeah, this is interesting. I have 3 books coming out in this year. I've never done that before, so I'm excited about that as well. This book in audio, Lies About Black People is coming out in paperback in May, and then Trigger Words drops in November.
To throw on another, speaking of that new voice, you, in your earlier talk, you had recited a poem that you said you wrote 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. With all of your new works coming out and these other projects, with how many years ago this book came out, would you do anything differently if you had released that today, or would there be anything you would add to it, say in this audiobook version, if you could change it?
One of my biggest challenges has been marketing. Language matters, right? I used to say I'm terrible at marketing. I need to get better at marketing. I am a content producer. Like on my YouTube channel, like I do content. Like I put out YouTube stuff every day, do political stuff, motivational stuff. I'm putting out my 9th music album this year. Like I'm a content creator, but I would have learned more of the business side of show business. A lot of us, we pay attention to the show and not the business, and that's how a lot of us get played. I would have learned a little better about the marketing, the production, in terms of getting your stuff out. Like I'll finish an album today and put it out on like Monday, as opposed to someone saying, well, you have to time it right because you want to get it out for Grammy season in time. I just don't do that. I'm just like, I need to get it out there like ASAP to the world. So those types of strategic things, it took me years to actually get into the habit of actually writing a business plan type thing, which I have. It's almost done. Because, but that business side of it, it's really important. And more people, especially those who are artists, you have to learn that business side. And so I've been spending more time learning about the business side, making sure I'm putting things in ways that I can pass down to my kids so that they own my work and all of that other type of stuff. But, as an artist, sometimes we just want to get it out to the world. And so I just put stuff out all of the time. And that's probably something I would have done differently, learn the business side of things earlier on, so that maybe I'd be in a better position as it relates to that stuff, marketing, promotion, and all of that. Like I don't have a street team or anything like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I know I am personally looking forward to seeing what projects you have coming out soon. And Dr. Dibinga, I just want to thank you for your time today. It has been a pleasure to have you here at Montgomery County Community College, and it's definitely been, it's a great opportunity for myself. I've gained a lot of inspiration. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sloan. I appreciate you. Mm-hmm. I appreciate you. This was awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Sloan and Dr. Dibinga. Everyone, please join me again in thanking Dr. Dibinga for his time today. We could not be more thrilled to have had you here today. I think, I speak for many of us when I say that it was truly an honor and we've had a great day. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today, both in person and via our live streams. We have a faculty-led workshop coming up as part of our symposium events tomorrow at 2 p.m. And we hope to see you all in October for our next presidential symposium on diversity. Everyone, please get home safe, and thank you for being here.